Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ninth episode of the Masters with Harshith podcast. Over the last eight episodes, seen subjects and courses like computer science, data science, electrical engineering, information systems, engineering management. But today, we're taking a completely different subject so that we have and we cater to more people, and that is architecture. So today we have with us Nithila. Hi, Nithila.
Hi, Harshith. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for taking your time out today. I know it's super hectic, and thank you so much for taking time out today. So, Nithila is currently doing her master's in architecture from Georgia Tech. So, this episode's going to be all about architecture in the US. So, yeah,
Thank you.
Nithila, let's get
Uh,
started.
Thank you for
Sorry,
actually taking
please.
the time to do this as well. Yeah, really
Absolutely.
appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Thank you. So, Nithila, what made you pick up architecture? So, you were a biomath student, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I was a biomath student, I took computer science, but still, architecture is completely different. So, what was the leap, and what did that look like for you? So, if there are people watching this in 11th and 12th, and they want to know, how do I decide what career I want to pursue? What would your response be to that?
Okay, so I chose architecture because I think whichever career you choose, you need to think about your strengths and interest.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew like when I did biomath what my interests and strengths were, or rather what my interests and strengths were not at. So
Right.
if you choose your interests and strengths, it leads to a rewarding and impactful career. And I did know I was good at design. And so my options were architecture and interior design. So looking at bigger picture, architecture was like more tempting because it's a very silly reason, but architecture has a much more powerful sound, and like when you see the buildings and spaces you create, it's very impactful and it's very satisfying. So the power that you have to make a person feel a certain way in a certain space is very, very, very powerful. And it's a good balance between expressing uh, spaces in an artistic way and also like practical problem solving. So I like that balance. And yeah, so that's why I chose architecture.
That's very interesting. So, Nitla, do you have any particular space, like field in architecture you're interested in? I'm sure it has a lot of different varieties, right? So,
So in my undergrad, in most undergrad architecture programs, they do like take you through everything like landscape architecture, urban planning, sustainability, uh, climatic analysis of a lot of things. So what resonated most with me was sustainable architecture. And that's something that we all need to think about, not just in architecture, like even maybe in computer science, you have things to talk about sustainability. And in architecture, it's
absolutely.
such a huge role, like in the construction field. So that was the thing that I was most interested in, sustainable architecture. So yeah, that's what I was most interested because of the impact it has and why it's a pressing need in today's world and how important it is to align all our goals towards that. Yeah.
Right. So, Nitla, let's look at the timeline of what you did after school, right? So, can you walk us through your undergraduate degree? Did you have any work experience, and like what you're pursuing now, and like how does it all connect?
Okay, so I went to Manipal in Dubai actually. So since it follows the Indian course, it's the 5-year program.
Hmm.
So the 4 years is going to be your coursework, and the last year is going to be your internship. So I applied to a lot of companies, and I did get into like three companies actually. So a
Nice.
small size firm, a mid size firm, and a large size firm. So it was very confusing because a large size firm was a very well reputed, globally known brand. And
Hmm.
the mid sized one was a sweet spot, which is well recognized in the region, in the Middle East and North Africa region. And
Hmm.
small size was a startup. So it was very confusing which one to choose because you can go for the name, or you can go for the experience, or
Right.
you can just like start from scratch and prove you're important. So I chose a sweet spot
Right.
and chose the mid sized one. So I worked
Hmm.
at this company called LW Design, and they do high-end residential and hospitality. It was such a good experience because no matter how much you learn in your academic field, when you go to the workplace and you actually do work and see buildings being built and spaces you create being formed, it's just an absolutely incredible feeling. The practical experiences cannot be equated to the academic, way that you get from, your coursework. And secondly, skill development as well. Like uh, you're so like focused on like providing like creating spaces in a very abstract form when you're doing your academic course, but
Right.
when you're in the workplace, you have to think about, okay, people are going to be here. You need to think about each and every small detail. So that's
Correct.
a skill that I learned. And also along with that, like technical skills such as like 3D modeling, working with, you know, project management, basically working with consultants, your clients, what they expect, how you need to talk to them, what they expect, what they want to be, what they want to see. So
Correct.
that's very important, and even mentorship. So I had a really good mentor during my internship program, and that made all the difference because it's the people you work with and the skills you learn from them. And finally, the networking
Absolutely.
made a really good professional, relationship, built like good professional relationship with like a lot of people, and I'm still in like contact with a lot of them. I think it'll help me even like over for the days to come, because no matter if you're in Dubai or in the US, it's such a small world. At the end of the day, it's all connected, and I think people need to understand how important it is to keep that, maintain the
Connection.
relationship. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that was interning. And since if you're good at what you do, they do hire you. You have to talk to them. You have to be confident what you do. You have to be good at
Right.
what you do, most importantly. So I spoke to them and they were ready to extend my work period indefinitely. So I told them I'd like
Nice.
to stay for another year and I want to do my master's after that because I did enjoy interning, but I did
Hmm.
feel like having an additional year of full time would like improve my knowledge and more exposure to more projects. And it also made me understand the business side of things and not just like an intern, like how
Correct.
you go through the legal process of things, how important it is to understand things around how the office works. Yeah,
Absolutely. I think what you mentioned was very important because the way you learn it in school or like at university is like you've got certain fixed number of constraints and you just do it according to that, you're done. But in real life, it's very
exactly.
different. You've got actual people you've got to consider. You've got, you've got your XYZ people, like, your seniors, your managers, like you said, your contractors. You've got to think from all their perspectives and like do something that satisfies all of them. So it's a completely different game altogether. So thanks for bringing that up. So,
Definitely.
it's like you mentioned that you really liked working and things like that, right? So, what made you in the first place like decide that you want to go for your masters and like spend some more time studying? When did you realize that you needed to study more?
I think in the beginning of my internship, I was like, okay, I'm probably going to do my internship and I'm going to like go straight for my master's. But then the more I was interning, I was like, projects don't like finish in a certain period of time. It moves on, goes on. And I wanted to like understand more and like learn more from like the place I was working. And they did some really good projects and they did in like a, a good range of places. So I was very invested and it was quite interesting. So I wanted to stay longer to learn more. That was my primary goal.
Right,
So which is
right,
why I think around like midpoint of my internship, I was like, okay, I definitely want to stay longer. And it was a good firm.
right.
They had some really good projects, which is very compelling to stay.
Right, right. Absolutely. So, Nithila, when did you realize that you're enjoying your work, right? So you could have continued working. So, but why did you decide that what made you think that you have to study more? Like you've got to go back to school and you've got to learn something more, like to bridge some gap at your workplace that you saw that a skill probably you thought you needed to improve on. Was there something like that? Was there something that hit you that you've got to study more?
It did because a good question. Give me a couple of minutes to think about it.
Right.
Well, I did learn a lot from like my workplace,
Hmm.
but there was still more to learn in terms of academics as well, which was
Right.
not
So probably it was just
done.
your hunger for knowledge because
Yeah,
you wanted to go into more depths of what you're already doing,
exactly.
and you
Yeah.
want to know the nitty gritty details and things like that. Probably that's probably
Also,
what I can
mainly
understand.
about like project management is what I was very keen on. And
Interesting.
that's something
Okay.
that I thought I do believe and I do think it's happening is what I
Hmm.
gained mostly from my master's program, like
Hmm.
taking the next step and like going from a junior architect to like, a senior architect
Right.
to bridge the gap
Right.
in between and to go from like project management as well. I think
Right.
masters fills that gap quite easily. Like if you
Got
if
it.
you're in a workplace, if you're continuously working, it would take like 6 years. And that's
Right.
shorter when you do your masters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You've got more skills under your belt, and
Exactly.
you've got more. You have way more knowledge to deal
Yeah,
with
I'm
things. That makes
qualified.
sense. Absolutely, absolutely. So, Nithila, what are your career aspirations? So, where do you see like how does it work? So, you're doing your master's in architecture now, so you'll be an architect, and how does it work from there?
So I do want to become an architect who specializes in sustainable design in the
Hmm.
next 5 to 10 years. And I
Okay,
aspire to work with established architecture firms because, big
interesting.
companies do have really nice projects. And it's really tempting to
Absolutely,
work on like lovely projects and like put my input in terms of sustainable design. Uh,
right,
you have to be committed to sustainability to like actually be involved in those things.
right, right.
So I aim to lead and like also like actively contribute to projects that achieve LEED program certification, also like living building certification, which is very common here
Hmm.
in the region.
Right,
So yeah, and when you put in like your environmental conscious design, it also influences like the people who are living in it. Like they
correct,
probably won't realize it, but it will impact them in a good way. But
right,
eventually, I plan to further like enhance my expertise in sustainable design through continuous learning and certification because it's a constantly evolving field, and
absolutely.
eventually take on leadership roles and guide and inspire teams to create sustainable
That
architecture
makes sense.
solutions for various sectors, including high-end residential and hospitality. So
Right.
that's my
That sounds like a very
aspirations now.
recurring theme. So
Yeah.
probably that's really going to be like interesting.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
nice. That's nice. So, Nithila, you're currently pursuing your master's at Georgia Tech in the US, right? So before you decided to head to the US, did you also consider the European countries like Italy or like France, where they're quite famous for architecture as well? What was your reasoning behind the US?
So I did consider Spain actually because Spain is such a beautiful country. And I did a semester exchange in Barcelona and I
Hmm.
did see the work that they do. Absolutely beautiful, brilliant. But in terms of career prospects, it's a little bit less. Europe is a little bit less, and
Hmm.
also language is a huge barrier. Like
Right.
they speak Catalan in Barcelona and Spain,
Right.
Spanish in the rest of Spain. So
Right.
bridging
Right.
that gap would be a bit of a challenge, and having English as my first language or my the language that I most like speak in,
Correct. Correct.
it's more convenient to move to a country that's yeah. So
Makes
that
sense.
was
I
the
think that
biggest
that's
yeah.
right. That makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. That makes a
So
lot of
career
sense.
prospects and language is the biggest uh, advantage that US had over Europe.
Absolutely. That makes sense. I think that's for a lot of other fields as well. So I think, yeah. So, Nithila, what are you studying at Georgia Tech? I mean, before that, what are the universities did you apply to in the US? And like, how did you figure out that, how did you shortlist the universities? What were your considerations when you were shortlisting universities? So the reason I'm asking this to you is because I've spoken to people who've not done other things like computer science and things like that. So it's the first time I'm asking it to someone who's done architecture. So I'm imagining that it might be slightly different. So I want to know what factors you were looking at.
Okay. So there are two types of schools. Mostly one is like art schools and more some of them are technical schools. So art
Hmm.
schools focus more on like abstract design, more inclined towards creativity, like Pratt School of Design, lovely
Right,
school, even SCAD, like Savannah College of Art and Design. And
right,
there are other technical schools like University of Virginia or Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech, and even Harvard Graduate School of Design, Columbia Graduate School of Design. They're all more technical, more than
right,
abstract.
right.
So I wanted to go to a school that was more inclined towards the workplace because I do plan to like continuing working and not, going an academic
Not
path.
research. Right.
Yeah. So that's why I wanted to go to a school that was more inclined towards this. So
Interesting.
Georgia Tech's Master of Architecture program has two main options, which is a 2 year
Mhm.
program and a 3 year program. So if you have an undergrad in anything, even could be computer science, you can still do the Master of Architecture program, which is a 3 year program.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you need to like finish certain mandatory courses in your first year, and then you'll be
Mhm.
back with your 2 year course program. So since I had an undergrad in architecture, I
Right.
decided to do the 2 year program. And it's a really, really good program. There's a lot of research going on. It's very grounded to like what the workplace expects. So I really
Mm.
love that. And they have brilliant connection with like the
Industry.
workplace,
Right.
like Perkinsville, Jacques Angel's group. So many good places to like, opportunities that might open up, that will open up when you study at a good
Absolutely.
school. So the other school
Right.
I was closely looking at was University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, but
Mhm.
I decided not to go there just because it was too cold. And Georgia
Right.
Tech's
Right.
climate is Atlanta's lovely climate here, so that
Correct.
was the main factor.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's a lot of that. That's a factor people do not usually take into consideration. But I think you really should, because once you get there and the cold hits you, you probably
exactly.
realize that it's not as easy as you think it is. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
definitely.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
So, Nithila, does your university, like, does your course have any specialization per se? Like you said, you were interested in sustainability management, right? So, does your course have subjects or like electives that you can take that will probably help you specialize in that direction, or like what does the program structure in general look like?
Okay, so in the cohort, so we have like design studios, we have
Hmm.
electives, we have thesis, and we have the professional practice. So in
Okay.
the design studio, there's like various professors who do various, they have a various, they have different approach to the design itself. So the
Mm-hmm.
professor I chose, Mr. Howard Wertheimer, he does a
Hmm.
lot of mass timber construction, which is a sustainable
Okay.
approach to the construction field in the region right now. And he's done a lot of
Okay.
amazing projects here, a lot of living buildings. So you can choose a professor who focuses on that, and that's one way
Hmm.
of going. And you do
Right.
have electives that focuses on sustainable design, urban planning, digital modeling, and construction management. So you do
Mm.
get to choose one of that. And
Right.
then you have your thesis or capstone projects, and that's completely up to you, right? So you can
Right.
choose that. And even your professional practice, you can apply to places or like, you know, concentrate on like why you need to like go towards sustainable approach to the professional practice as well. So there is an opportunity, there is a way to like focus on like what you're interested most in.
Got it. Got it. That does make sense. That people can like, depending on what their interest is, they can like pick professors in that way and move
Exactly.
in that direction. That does make sense. So Nithila, what is your class size? Like, how many students are studying there, and what kind of students usually get in? Like, what is the mix of like people with experience, without experience, and things like that?
Okay, so um, there's roughly around 65 students in my design course.
Hmm.
So although it's a big class, when you hear 60, with the professor, it's just 12 students, 12 to 13, because I think
Okay.
that's really good because you have that opportunity to have that one on one and
Right.
them giving the time and you having that, the exposure is brilliant. In terms of the mix of students, there's a lot, there's a lot of people who come from India, like
Hmm.
around like 12 to 15 Indian students. And
Okay.
there's a few and in terms of international students, it's going to be like 30 to 60. So 1:2.
Got it.
And yeah, and what is the other part of the question? Sorry.
What about work experience? Do a lot of students
Work
come with work
experience. Yes.
experience?
Most of us have work experience because even in the undergrad course, they do expect you to have like internship. It's mandatory. So everyone has work experience as such, but
Right.
some people do have more than others. Like of
Right.
a colleague of mine, uh, a classmate of mine, sorry, a classmate of mine, he went to Carnegie Mellon and did landscape architecture. And
Mhm.
then he worked for like 6 years and he decided to come back to
Oh,
school to learn more about architecture. And I think that's
right.
really brilliant, really cool. Yeah.
Right. Right. That makes
So
sense. So
some
it's
people
it's a
have
good
more,
mix.
some people have less. It's
Right.
a
Right.
good mix, yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So, Nithila, what are the different career paths that are possible after a degree in architecture? So, obviously, architect is one thing, but you were talking about construction management and things like that, right? So, what roles do you end up with, like doing those tracks, and how does it work in the field?
So you can be like straight up just be like an architect, which is the most straightforward way to
Right.
approaching things.
Right.
Or else you can be a landscape architect. You can be an urban planner, urban designer. That is a lot of
Okay.
scope right now because people are constantly rethinking how we want to design a city, how we want people
Hmm.
to be in a city or like any part of the planet, actually, in the bigger
Correct.
picture.
Correct.
That's one thing,
Absolutely.
that's urban planning. Then there's policies and
Hmm.
there's interior architecture. That's very, very interesting. And then
Right.
there's lighting, then there's so many opportunities. Like it's not just
Right.
limited to, yeah,
Not just a straightforward architect. You can do a lot of
exactly.
related things as well.
Yeah, and even like
Makes sense.
research opportunities.
Right.
A lot of
Right.
people go into
Absolutely.
research or academia as well.
Right. I've heard a lot of about like, behavioral things in architecture, like where do you place a room, where do you place a washroom? It's got to be close to, it's got to be towards the end of the hallway so that, people can interact on the way and things like that. So are there like
Exactly.
things of that sort also that you learn in your curriculum?
Absolutely. I love the question. So, for example, everyone here, like, okay, for example, if you enter a space and if you see a
Mhm.
lift straight up and if you see a
Right.
stair, people will obviously tend to take the lift. But
Correct.
if you've just placed the lift a little bit to the side where you can't see directly, where you have to make an effort to go, people take the
Right.
stairs. And that human tendency, or like the fact that you can make places more efficient or like make more sustainable, bring people to like
Decisions.
a
Right.
more, yeah, I think that's so incredible. The power that architects have in the way that you
Right.
approach a space, love that. Yeah, that's
Right.
so
So do you
nice.
have
And like,
courses that kind of emphasize on this, or like do you just learn this as like part of different courses, like bits here and there?
so usually in our design studios, like we choose a professor, so we see their work. So what's the main reason
Mm,
why I chose Georgia Tech is for the professor. He has like a very strong sustainable approach, and I wanted to be in his course, and
mm,
I knew that from the beginning. So they do. So they have so many years of experience. He has like so much years of experience working on these buildings, and you
mm.
learn from their approach. So when you do design, you do have pinups. You do like outside people coming in and reviewing your work. So they do give
Right.
their input and what people expect. So you get like input from so many people. You
You learn
hear
from all these different sources.
exactly so many
Right.
people to learn from, and it's always about the learning. You have to be a lifelong learner. Yeah, in
Absolutely.
architecture,
Absolutely. That sounds absolutely. That sounds. I think not just in architecture, right, but in any field, lifelong learning is very important to stay relevant. So
definitely. Yeah, to stay
yeah,
relevant, exactly.
correct. So Nithila, how much does your program cost, the 2-year program, and like how are you funding it? What are the living expenses around? Like, what is the
Okay,
thing?
so Atlanta is a lovely city. It's really nice. So the campus is in Midtown, so you have to pay the cost of living in a city.
Right.
But it has its pros and cons. So tuition costs around 18k dollars per semester.
Right.
So with the additional miscellaneous expenses that architecture might carry, like with your materials and your laptops, if you want to purchase everything else, approximately 40k per year. And your
Mhm.
rent would be so living comfortably, your rent would be like 18k, which is
Mm.
definitely way less than New York, I'm guessing, for the things you get
Absolutely.
here.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, so it is an
So
expensive, it is kind of expensive, but I think it's definitely worth it. And for living in the city, I think it's definitely worth it. Yeah,
right. So you would say somewhere between 50 to 60,000 a year is the max you can expect. Like 60K is probably the
yeah,
max
yeah.
you can
And
expect.
my parents are funding it, but I do plan to repay them eventually. Yeah,
Absolutely. I think we're on the same boat on that. So yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So is there any tip that you'd particularly want to give to aspirants of like Georgia Tech's Masters in Architecture program? Maybe
yeah,
something you
definitely.
did in your application, something you spoke about, or something you found very interesting in Georgia Tech that is not very easy to find.
So what made Georgia Tech stand out is definitely the fact that how closely they work with like firms around in and around Atlanta,
Hmm.
and how relevant their projects are in the current world, and how ahead they are in terms of technology and the resources that they have within the program. Really,
Right.
really, really interesting. And like how they take project management. Like we have something called the architecture registration examination. So they push you to like take it because it's a comprehensive examination developed by the NCORP, or the National Council of Architecture Registration Board.
Hmm.
So you need to clear that to be a licensed architect. So they make you go to they channel you to like be successful in the professional world. So I really like that
Right.
approach of Georgia Tech, and that's one of the main
Mm.
things that pushed me to come to Georgia Tech. Yeah, and if you want to like come to Georgia Tech, you should know that it's a very technical school. It's a tech school, so it's very
Right.
research oriented and very much
Mm.
grounded to like reality. It's not as abstract as some other schools might be, but your portfolio should reflect that, and that's the most important thing. And having like experience does help you so much because you get way more comfortable with like exploring new technology. So yeah,
Right.
it does help.
Right. I think one thing I want to know personally is like what kind of things do you submit while applying for your masters? Like for us as like an engineering program, you've got to submit your resume, an SOP, and things like that. But I'm assuming in addition to all of that, an architecture student might have to submit like a portfolio or like things like that, right?
Yeah.
Does that exist? What is that like?
Oh yeah. So I applied to I think five schools. Yeah, five schools, and all of them
Hmm.
had the same requirement except for UVA, University of
Okay,
Virginia.
great.
So University of Virginia had additional questions about like social injustice and all those things. But most
Oh,
universities are
crazy.
quite straightforward. Yeah,
Okay,
it's quite interesting. It was very interesting to
right.
like go through their application process because it makes it makes you introspect when they ask you certain questions. But
Absolutely, absolutely.
yeah,
Right.
but most schools, the rest of the other schools that I applied to were very focused on like what you bring to the table because
Mm,
it's they want you to learn, but they also want to make sure that you're qualified enough to like learn from them. So
absolutely.
they do have like a standard that they set for themselves.
Correct.
Portfolio is the most important thing. They do expect to see like a few person projects, a few projects that you worked in the company that you worked for,
Mm,
a good mix of other interests as well. So the portfolio is the most important thing. Even when you go for like an interview for a career fair or something, your portfolio should speak because they don't now always have like a face to face interview. The portfolio should
correct.
speak of the work that you do, the work that you're interested in as well. That's one thing, and then you have your SOPs like every other university, and
Right.
then you have your IELTS or TOEFL. That was, and your GPA does matter, but not as much as I think as other programs. But your
Mm,
portfolio is the most important thing. Yeah,
right. That makes a
yeah.
lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So I think it's like coming towards the end of the podcast, right? So what kind of so you were talking about career fairs. So in for CS programs of software engineering fields and things like that, you've got companies who come on campus and like they just show you or like talk about what opportunities they have and things like that. Is that the same way for architecture as well? And like, do you have to go up on LinkedIn and apply for jobs and things like that, or like how does it work? Because I'm assuming architecture is a way more close knit community than like tech, because tech's too big. So how does it work?
Okay, so another main reason why I chose Georgia Tech is since it's in the city. I think one of the main reasons why it's in the city is because it's also like a pulling factor because most of the companies or most of the architecture firms are in and around the city. So it
Mm,
does increase your scope for working within the city.
right.
But okay, in terms of Georgia Tech's career fair, they do have two career fairs for our department. One is a
Hmm.
major career fair where there's companies that come for CS, for biotechnology, and for all the other ones. So
Hmm.
that's the big one. But we
Right.
do have a College of Design dedicated career fair. And in
Interesting.
that, a lot of really good firms come and like they recruit us for like summer internship or even for like, permanent positions once you're close to graduating as well. And being in Atlanta, there's a lot of scope for like commercial architecture that could be like office building, retail spaces, and mixed use
Mm,
developments, and also residential architecture because there's a lot of suburbs in and around Atlanta. So you do have a lot of multifamily housing, single family homes, and condos. So,
right.
and they are more currently focused on sustainable and energy efficient design because once you buy a property, you want to make sure you get the best out of it. And then you
Correct.
also have historic preservation. And also sustainable
Right.
design has like a major role here in the region. Yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I think all of what you're saying fits into like one big picture that you've always wanted. So that makes a lot of sense. So Nithila, the last question I want to ask you is: I know you said your undergrad GPA is not such a big factor, but if it was, I mean, like, would you be comfortable sharing your GPA, how much you scored on the TOEFL, and if you've taken the GRE, how much you scored on that? And also, is GRE
Okay.
mandatory for architecture programs? And yeah,
Okay. So GRE was not mandatory for any of the architecture programs that I checked,
crazy.
so I didn't
Okay,
bother doing it.
fair enough. Right.
GPA, almost all of them had like a minimum GPA, like all the universities that I applied to had like a minimum GPA that they had to be fulfilled. I think 3.2 was what they expected minimum.
Right. Right.
I think so I scored like so I followed the 10-point scale and I had an
Right.
8.6 if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong,
Right.
but it's a 8 plus that I know,
Fair
8.5
enough.
plus. See?
Right.
And there was always an option between TOEFL and IELTS. So
Right.
I scored um, an 8 in that. Yeah. and
In
IELTS.
IELTS, right? Makes
Yeah,
sense. Makes sense.
yeah.
Cool, cool. Thank you. So I think Nithla, that brings us to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for your time. Everything you've shared here is like super, super useful. So if someone wants to plan their career either in architecture or sustainability management, I think you've given them a good overview of where they can head to. So yeah, that brings us to the end of the podcast, everyone. Thank you, Nithla, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for
Thank
watching
you.
this. If you want to watch more and like learn more about other fields and things like that, do check out the channel and do not forget to hit the subscribe button. Thank you.
Thank you.